the go live. I love it. Every single time I'm just like, is this working? Okay. Let's see. Let's switch our tabs over to see how it is going. Okay. So, hello everyone. Welcome to Auspol Explained. Does a little interactive... yay! It is there. It is working. Wonderful. Okay. Hello everyone. Welcome. My name's David. As always, this is, me doing a little bit of a live stream, and I just realized that when I do Alt-Tab, it shows you the other things I had going. So I don't know who's actually watching, if many people. I always find that like the start of live streams are very awkward. So what I'm going to do is, while we wait for people to come join us, lots of other live streams, they end up having little like things that they do. For starters, am I loud enough? Okay. Can everyone confirm that I am loud enough? Yeah, so I figured, look, other people have beginning rituals for their live streams. I am going to be talking about politics and how Parliament works, and I love that, but I also love Pokemon. If you can't see, there's always little Pokemon stuff in the background of like my videos. So as a fun little joy, we all get to watch me open a booster pack. Thank you. I am loud enough. Okay, so I'm going to open a booster pack just as a nice little beginning. Think of some questions. I have a PowerPoint presentation, as you can see, and then we'll get into it. So, crinkly, crinkly, crinkly. I love it. There's so many of you already. I honestly thought there would be less, but welcome everyone to the live stream. Okay, so before we get into politics, we have a basic steel energy. We have the QR code for the live play thing. Okay, we've got a beautiful Lechonk, everyone. Not the best Lechonk. There's another Lechonk recently released where he's like stumbled upon a mushroom. It's the most beautiful thing ever. Honestly, like if I wasn't doing this, why wouldn't I just become like a live streamer who does like Pokemon TCG on Twitch? That'd be great. Flip baby, beautiful. Someone's just said Senator Payman. Is that you? Or are you talking about Pokemon cards? Growlithe, oh, he's so cute. Thus far, I'm pretty sure I have all of these already. Staravia, beautiful, wonderful. I recently got a bunch of cards for a Blood Moon Ursaluna non-EX deck that I'm building. And I can't wait to fight my wife, who has a modified Gardevoir EX deck that always beats me. Basically, unless she draws terribly, basically it always beats me. And she's made it even better recently with Screamtail. Anyway, Mousehold, beautiful. Okay. Oh, I love it. It screams so much. Vitality Band. I've got one of those already. Toxicity. Look, this is just for me. This is self-indulgent. We're near the end. I don't think I actually have this one already, so that's nice. Ooh, choose 2 random cards from your opponent's hand. Your opponent reveals those cards and shuffle them into their deck. I love it. I love disrupting other people. Energy Switch, but a nice little hollow one. Wonderful. Skiddo. I love it. It's cute. It's beautiful. And are we ready, everyone? Is it going to be fancy? Is it going to be amazing? Is it going to just be another just basic thing, but kind of holographic? It is. Annihilate. Oh, beautiful. Honestly, Rage Fist, 70 times each prize card your opponent has taken for 1 energy, even though it's a stage 2. Ridiculous! That's going to kill so many things. Okay, now that we've done that, now that we've indulged in a nice little pre-live stream ritual, I see that the chat is popping off. So, let's get into it, everyone. So, now that we've had a fun thing, let's talk about a non-fun thing. Recently, I can't recall what it is called, but there is a test every few years of like, hey, how is our civics and citizenship education going? And something like 71 or 72% of year 10s failed. They just had a subpar knowledge of how civics works, and that's bad for democracy if you don't understand it. So let's annihilate people's ignorance by going into the basics of Parliament, everyone. Feel free to ask me questions along the way, but hopefully you have more knowledge than someone in year 10. They actually didn't start... Like, I get a lot of people saying, like, oh, why didn't I learn this in high school or whatever when they watch my videos? And the answer is they do now. They possibly didn't. It was introduced into the curriculum as like I think a necessary thing in 2016 or thereabouts. It was included in previously, but it was like more optional. And so I find there are lots of teachers who don't really feel very confident when it comes to civic and citizenship, and it's all just like bundled into HASS. So they're like, oh, I don't understand how Parliament works, I'll just do geography, you know? So, hey everyone, there's an election coming up. Let's talk about how Parliament works. Let's ask me some questions along the way. And yeah, so if everyone's ready, let's dive in. Feel free. I will. This is an interactive Q&A. I just wanted a structure. You know, normally I just sort of get on here and I'm like, who's actually here? So let's actually get into how this works. And if you have questions along the way, Okay. So we have two chambers. We have a bicameral parliament. I know, big words. Bi, like a bicycle. Cameral, I don't understand the Latin root of that one. So our lower house is the House of Reps. I realized that I created this PowerPoint with a blue box in the top right-hand corner to be like, don't put any graphics there because the camera will obscure them. But I realized I didn't build it the right dimensions. So there's a little blue bar underneath me. Anyway, so House of Representatives, right? Single member electorates, 151 members. One of them represents you. So this is your local member, basically. One person in an electorate is the winner takes all, right? Yeah, so there's people from all across Australia that represent Australia in Parliament. So this is where the magic happens, or at least normally originates, because this is where any money bill has to start, basically. The House of Representatives, the lower house. Okay, it's based off the House of Commons. In the UK, we have what we call a Westminster-style parliament because the British came here and invaded Australia. And if anyone takes, umbrage with me saying the word invaded, well, read the journals of the actual people who did that, and they will refer to it as an invasion. Early settlers or colonists referred to it as an invasion. They, they were aware that Indigenous people had territorial boundaries, and that was their land, and they just went, eh. So, yeah, we can say the British invaded, and if we don't say the British invaded, we are somehow being retroactively rewriting history to not actually reflect what happened or the views of the people doing it. Yeah. Anyway, whoops. Little aside there. Fun fact, I actually went to see the House of Commons. I went to see the UK Parliament a year and a half ago. Less than a year and a half ago. On my honeymoon. I got married in 2020. I did not have a honeymoon for multiple years because of a little thing called the pandemic, and I actually went on a tour of the UK Parliament. It's amazing. It annoys me that it costs money because other parliaments around, the world don't cost money. But they're like, it's the Palace of Westminster, it's very big. Go. So it's if you ever visit the UK, honestly, it's so amazing. The tour is 90 minutes and it was like jam-packed with so much stuff. It's such a gorgeous, gorgeous building. Unfortunately, they don't let you take any photos throughout it, except for like Westminster Hall. So, redacted. Unfortunately, I can't show you any photos of my honeymoon. My darling wife were... Look, so, like, it's weird how, like, boomers have this, like, humor of, like, is he dragging you around? Is she dragging you around? Like, as if, like, this isn't, like, a communal thing that we enjoy, both as a couple. I mean, this is for me, obviously, to see, like, various various parliaments around the world, but also, like... She's like, hey, David's having a great time, so enjoyed that as well. Riley Crawford asks, how many parliaments have you been to? Good question. The answer is lots. I have been to the federal one. I did that when I was like 18. I've been to WA Parliament a lot. Have I visited any? I don't think I've walked past the New South Wales Parliament. I've been to the Victorian Parliament. Yeah, that one's very beautiful. Someone asked where in Australia I'm from. Western Australia. There's an election happening in less than 3 weeks, so soon I'll be releasing a video about that. Anyway, where was I? So I've been to at least 3 parliaments in Australia. I haven't really been inside the New South Wales one, just the outside. Whereas on my honeymoon, I went to the UK Parliament, the Palace of Westminster. I went to... Tynwald on the Isle of Man, not part of Britain. That one was like one of my favourites. The Scottish Parliament, which is the building. Look it up. The building looks on a first impression hideous, ugly as sin. But going on the tour and having it explained to me, I was like, oh no, this is like a work of art. This is really representative, and I think it's really interesting. So I actually really like the Scottish Parliament now. And then I went to the Republic of Ireland's Parliament. I couldn't go to Northern Ireland's Parliament because I didn't have time. Is that the end of the list? No, I didn't get to go to Wales. I didn't get to go to... I saw the outside of the French Senate. I didn't get to go in. Yeah, I've been to many. So... Anyway, yeah, the answer is I've been to, like, I don't know, several. So, we also have an upper house. Remember the bicameral element? We have the Senate, and sometimes I test people and I'm like, do you know what colours they are? And some people, for some reason, can't get the colours right. So I am going to constantly get distracted by questions. So Cat Flap asks, gosh, hang on a second. Cat Flap asks, what's your favourite parliament anywhere, either from the inside or the outside? Look, honestly, I love the Isle of Man, and the Tynwald Parliament is fascinating. It's tricameral. It has 3. So there's the House of Keys, there's the Legislative Council, which is appointed for some reason. And then, so a bill has to pass through both. The Legislative Council is like less powerful because it's not elected, but then members then sit in Tynwald Court, which is not a court. It's effective. Like the bill can't pass until it has a majority approval by both chambers within the third chamber. And the change that they do is that the third one is still presided over by the president of the Legislative Council, but the Speaker of the House of Keys, the lower house, gets to speak like any other member. Instead of being, I'm a presiding officer, I'm not going to really speak lots much about this bill because that will interfere with my role as presiding officer, the Speaker then gets to say whatever they so wish at that point. And also, the Tynwald Parliament is over 1,000 years of continued existence. It is the longest-running continuous parliament in the world. It started in the year 979, as far as we're aware. It may have been earlier, who knows. And so when I went there, I'm really good at sort of like, being like, hey, show me a little bit more. They took me to the Millennium Room, once everyone else had left, and there is a gift from Australia from 1979 of like a kangaroo fur and a didgeridoo with 3 bends to it because of the Manx Triskelion, or how you pronounce it. Yeah, and it's like, this is a gift from my perspective, nearly 50 years ago to commemorate 1,000 years of this Parliament. It's very, very cool. Anyway. Where was I? I was explaining the Senate. This is the upper house. This is the chamber of review, and it basically has... it works differently in that it has a proportional representation system. If you haven't seen my latest episode on that, go see that. Basically, if you live in a state, you have 12 senators. If you live in a territory, you have 2. That is because the Senate is the states chamber, and the original 6 states, which are the only 6 states we have, because we've never added a new one, they all get the same amount, which was originally 6, now 12, but there's half elections. So at the next election, unless there's a double dissolution, which seems unlikely, you will be going to the polls to elect 6 senators, which will have 6-year terms. So there's, 3 years, you elect half, another 3 years, you elect the other half. Another 3 years, you go for the first group gets to either get re-elected or lose, The difference is that territories aren't constitutionally guaranteed any kind of political representation whatsoever. In fact, it's basically like they get whatever Parliament so chooses. And eventually, I think it was the 70s, the Parliament chose to give them a senator. So the Senate is actually senators for the territories, so 2 for the ACT and 2 for the Northern Territory, and then whatever territory is closer to that counts as part of it. So Christmas Island is voting as part of the Northern Territory. Their senators don't have 6-year terms. They are 3-year terms, and they're connected to the House of Reps. So there's a little bit difference there, by the way. So if you're in a territory, sorry, your senators are not as effective in terms... I mean, they still have the exact same voting power. It's just that they don't have the same staying power in terms of how long that they get to be represented, and you just have to keep doing them. Neat. Gosh. Okay, let's see if I can catch up on questions. Yeah, 1,000 years, Tynwald is fantastic. Wow, the Right Honourable Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg is in the chat. Thank you for visiting us all the way from the UK, and your nanny has let you on the computer. Yeah, looking at the Tynwald wiki page, yeah, it's a great rabbit hole. It really annoys me that there isn't that much detail for Tynwald Wikipedia. Like, they have... the former president of the Legislative Council was the longest serving presiding officer anywhere in the Commonwealth. He had a prolific career of like 30 plus years. I think he was also the Speaker of the House of Keys at one point, and so his combined role as like presiding officer in the Tynwald Parliament longer than any other presiding officer in the Commonwealth realms. Which annoys me that his Wikipedia article is so brief. So I'm actually, it's on my to-do list to be like, I'm gonna fix that. Okay, anyway, back to Australia. Someone asks, what is a dissolution? Dissolution, dissolve. Parliament dissolves, basically, is the way of saying it ends, it's done, and you go to an election. The Senate can have what's called a double dissolution. So, because it's usually a half election, if the House introduces a bill, it gets rejected by the Senate, it can reintroduce that bill, I believe, 3 months later, and if it gets rejected by the Senate again, it can call for the House can call for a double dissolution, which just vacates all the seats of both chambers, and they go to an election. Bam. It's very rarely used. It was first used in 1914 by Joseph Cook, who I was literally reading about last night, and I guess the idea was like, oh, if there's like a deadlock between the two chambers about a bit of legislation, you can then be like, we're going to resolve this deadlock by just taking this to an election. And presumably it would be a central feature of that election. It never is. It seems very often that the legislation to trigger a double dissolution is basically just there for the sake of triggering a double dissolution. Like when Joseph Cook did it for the very first time ever, his plan was like, he had a single seat majority in the House of Reps, and he had a very hostile Senate that he could not control because there was lots of Labour members. if he couldn't appease them, he couldn't get things through. And he didn't like Labour at all, so his attitude was, screw them, I'm going to antagonize them as much as I can, as fast as I can, and deliberately make it so that they vote down my stuff so I can call a double dissolution in the hopes that the next election, the Senate, will look nice for me. And he lost super hard. So, like, he is not a good prime minister. Like, his own biographer was like, whatever qualities he had, leadership was not one of them. Like, his legacy is just like getting in and being like, actually, I'm gonna just fight Labour over everything. Like, his whole policy platform was just like, does Labour like this? No, undo it. It did not go well for him. He had no ability to compromise, which is what you usually need to do with the Senate, because the government almost never has a majority here. So the Senate is the kind of place where, you know, negotiation happens, unless you're Joseph Cook, in which case you just shoot yourself in the foot and then shoot yourself in the foot again. Anyway. Where was I? Anyway, so it's based off the House of Lords in the UK. You know, and I've seen this so many times, and I thought that the carpet was red because it's like, it's the red chamber. Blue is a royal colour. It's called the upper house because, you know, Lords, upper class, and then the House of Commons were the more common people, but they weren't very common. They still had to be wealthy landowners until like the 1800s. Anyway, House of Lords, I went to see that. It's very nice. It's very beautiful. It's very ornate. It's kind of ridiculous. But yeah, you can't take photos on tour except for the hall outside. So here's a nice little selfie with me and my wife having a wonderful time. Yeah, House of the UK Parliament, fantastic tour. Oh, okay. Someone asked, how do you choose which Senate seats are up at the next election after a double dissolution? Because it is... so the way that it works, because there's multiple people being elected, it's a quota system. So it's the number of seats available plus one divided... No, the number of votes overall divided by number of seats plus one. So you have a little bit of excess remainder. So the quota to get elected for a double dissolution is halved. It's very, very small. It's much easier for minor parties and independents to get in. And I believe the way they resolve resetting the half election is like, okay, the 6 most popular people get to stay. The 6 least most popular people, the ones that got the lower amount of votes, you get to go up to re-election next time. I think that's the resolution. Anyway, if they increase the size of Parliament, how are they going to stick all the extra seats in the lower house? Yeah, actually, this room, you can't see it, but this room is huge. The Senate and the House, so the current Parliament House in Canberra was finished in 1988, I think it was. Like, there was the old Parliament House that was built in 1927. I should know that. I have a coin. Wait, is that... Nope, that's the wrong coin. So, basically, right, they built it being like, okay, well, the size has drastically increased from before. It hadn't quite doubled by 1988, or had it? Oh, not entirely sure. So, basically, they were like, look, we will make it so that this room is huge so we can modify it in the future. So I think I read somewhere that it can have like 220 something like seats in it, I think. Like, it can be modified to be huge. So don't worry about that. And the Senate. Speaking of size increase, someone says, if the number of seats is determined by population, then when will a new seat be added? That's a bit difficult because the size of the House of Representatives is constitutionally linked to the size of the Senate. It's meant to be twice the size of the Senate as practical as possible. So what you really do find instead is population increases, but not evenly between the states. So sometimes there'll be a redistribution where it's like, oh, well, we can adjust the amount of seats in the House. Like, it doesn't have to be exact, because the Senate has 76. You can't have necessarily exact all the time. So sometimes we'll be like, oh, this state lost a seat, but this one gained it, because population growth there grew more. But then also there's this thing that throws it off, because the territory senators are not related to that nexus thing. But all original states have a minimum of 5 seats in the House of Reps. You can't have less. So Tasmania, despite the fact its population is tiny compared to other states, guaranteed 5. It could not possibly grow in population size to the point where its electorates would be comparable to that of like New South Wales. It's just like Tasmania is constitutionally protected to always have 5 seats, and I can't envision it ever having such a large, massive population growth that it gets a 6th. So, the number of seats isn't likely to change very much unless we add another senator. So, like, in the 70s, it was 10 senators per state. And then, now that it's 12, you can be like, okay, well, that's extra seats there. So, 2 senators per state, 4 new members for the House of Representatives times 6. You can, I don't know, kind of then redistribute it. So, if you want there to be more members of the House of Representatives, you need there to be more senators, basically. And if we just gave an extra senator, it would be really awkward for it to be odd, like 13 senators. So you'd have 14 senators, so then you'd have, what is that? I can't do my math very well. 24, 70, so it would be 174-ish members of the House of Reps, sort of 170-ish. We could do it. Yeah, that's how you'd fix it, basically. It's kind of static for this time period. Okay. Oh, apparently, according to Jason Briggs Moggs, it's literally done by a Senate resolution to resolve the double dissolution. Okay, fair enough. Gosh. I feel like I talked a little bit too long on that one. Yeah, we would look. We just need to add way more senators, and then Tasmania can be evened out. Okay, where was I? So, fun fact: there is a mace carried in by someone called the Sergeant at Arms and placed on the table of the House in the House of Representatives. What am I saying? Basically, the idea is it's inspired by the UK, because a lot of the traditions that we have are inspired by the UK. Fun fact, the Sergeant at Arms was the police force of the King back in the Middle Ages. King Henry the IV? Oh, whichever king it was in 1415. Was it Henry V? I don't know. 1415 was the year that he was like, here, House of Commons, you get a proper Sergeant at Arms to be the constable of the House, and to this day has the power of arrest. So if you were to come into the House of Representatives and start causing problems, Sergeant at Arms can arrest and kick you out. Though they have an ongoing agreement with the AFP for security for the House, so you probably just get kicked out by someone from the AFP instead. But it's one of those ceremonial things, right? We've got a mace. WA has the oldest still used mace, made in 1887. The West Australian State Parliament has the oldest one. Victoria had an older one than that, but it got stolen in 1891, I think it was. Allegedly by some drunken MPs who allegedly took it to the red light district, and we never found it again. So, I don't know. All the books on the table, reference material. Oh, no, I don't actually know much about those books. Anyway, let's talk about the people. So the House of Reps, that's where you find your Prime Minister. By convention, by the way, which is not a rule. We once had a Prime Minister who was from the Senate. That was John Gorton, but he resigned. He was the one who took over after Harold Holt died. And so he was like, hey, look, there's a vacancy in the House of Reps. I'll just resign from the Senate and run in that seat. the idea is that the leader of the government should be in the lower house because the government is formed by having a majority in the lower house, has supplying confidence in the lower house, and therefore can command the chamber, right? So if the Prime Minister was in the Senate and the House couldn't talk to the Prime Minister, it could technically work, but it would be weird. And then in the middle, we've got the Speaker of the House, who is there to preside over and ensure that these people play by the rules of the standing orders. And then from our perspective, it looks flipped, but from the Speaker's perspective, the government is on the right and the opposition is on the left. So currently that would be Peter Dutton, and I found an old photo of him, and he looks like... oh, gosh. He's an American YouTuber. You know, like the... What's his name? Like, Roadwork Ahead. I sure hope it does. The guy from that Vine. He looks like that guy. Kind of. Drew Gooden. That's it. he looks kind of like an off-brand Drew Gooden. Yeah. So, anyway. So, the Speaker is there. That's Speaker Dick. That's his name. And he can eject members if they disobey these standing orders too much. Yeah, so... Where was I? Thank you, everyone, for saying Drew Gooden. Thank you. Look it up. It's one of my favourite traditions that we get from the UK. Back in the Middle Ages, it was a very dangerous job to be the Speaker of the House of Commons because you had to speak on behalf of the Chamber, and what if Parliament was trying to make things that the King didn't like? So seven speakers were actually beheaded between the 1300s and 1500s. And it's like, well, you can't have a meeting without someone to chair the meeting. So two people would grab someone by the shoulders and drag them as they literally kicked and screamed for their lives to the chair. And it's like, tag, you're it. These days, we continue that tradition. So when the new speaker is elected, two people get them and escort them, sometimes playfully yanking them to the chair. So, yeah, look it up. The speaker gets dragged to the chair. By the 1700s, the speaker was like, I don't have to kick and scream. So it became a little bit more muted by then. But that's where that tradition comes from. Someone asks if the Governor-General has to sign all bills into law, but can they actually refuse, or is it just ceremonial? Yes, the Governor-General constitutionally is allowed to refuse. There's actually 4 things the Governor-General can do when it comes to a bill. 1 is sign it, which is the usual one. 2 is reserve it for the monarch's personal assent, which was done for certain things like royal titles. Gough Whitlam was like, I want to adjust the... was it royal titles? I can't remember if that actually needed legislation or not. Yeah, look, if there's something that interferes with the monarch's personal royal prerogative, that kind of thing gets reserved for royal assent by the monarch themselves. But even then, the monarch still probably says yes. The Governor-General may also send back the bill with proposed amendments, which the House can do as it wishes, and that includes the House going, thanks, but no, and then just giving it right back, at which point the Governor-General will probably do point 1, sign it anyway, because that was the suggestion. Like if the Senate sends an amendment back to the House of Reps can't just be like, nah, I don't care. If the Governor-General sends back an amendment, Parliament can be like, thank you, but no. But I think historically they have said yes, because that's such a rarely exercised power that it's done for a specific reason. And then the 4th one is reject, refuse outright, which I don't recall has ever actually happened for the Governor-General. I don't think it's happened. It has happened on a state level for governors. It used to be a thing more in the colonial era. So it is... yeah. Actually, no, the Australia Acts were not signed by the Queen. They weren't reserved for her assent, though she was consulted ahead of time, and she did give her consent for that. The Australia Acts were signed by the Governor-General at the time. The Queen came here to sign the proclamation of them, though. Yes, so, back to the House of Reps. It's not just these two guys. There's the government, and then there's, with the interesting thing about like our system. Well, I think everything is interesting, but we recently had a US election, right? And it's very presidential, and it's very focused on like two individuals being like, who do we want to be the leader of the government? And therefore also the leader of the executive in the the US. Whereas Australia's system of responsible government, the executive is elected members of parliament. So even though we kind of treat as a sort of pseudo-presidential race where we really focus on the leaders and be like, who's going to be the leader of the country, the executive is not separate. Trump, after the fact, was like, here's the people that I want to be running my departments, running these administration elements. And it is very much normal for the US president to not really pick, or at least say who they're picking as cabinet members until after the election. Like, it's very focused on the president as an individual, whereas the prime minister and cabinet, the minister for environment, minister for housing, etc., you can look those people up and see what they're doing and what their history and track record is. And then there's a shadow ministry, and then you can look up those members and know exactly what they are like ahead of time. Like, there isn't a surprise where you're like, oh, and then now that the leader of the opposition has become prime minister, he's going to pick random person from the street and go, here you go. Like, give or take, what the executive is going to look like after the election, whether Labour or Liberal win. So anyway, okay. Someone asked, if when we are a republic, would we uphold the election of all politicians rather than appointing like the US? Absolutely, we would continue to elect our politicians. There's absolutely no way that the Australian public would go to a referendum and willingly vote to lose power to directly elect their members. Okay. How exactly we elect the president or choose the president, that would be up for the model in the future. Anyway, it's not just these guys. We've got a lot of teal independents, and we've got a few greens in the House. This is the harder place for someone who's not part of the major parties to win, because you need to get more than 50% of the vote, which, major parties are major parties for a reason. They kind of have that strong support. The teals, they are individuals. The teal as a label is only really come up as a thing of convenience for the media. How long have I been doing this for? How long? I am so not far through my PowerPoint as I thought I'd be. I'd be like, oh, yeah. Teals are just sort of vaguely aligned through a focus on climate policy, and funded by Climate 200, but not controlled by Climate 200, which is basically a funding body that supports climate-focused candidates. So teals are individuals. You can't just be like, oh yeah, all teals will vote the same. No, they won't. They have different platforms. So if there's talk about a teal independent in your area at the next election, consider looking up their policies, because they, as an individual, like any other independent, will have their own nuance and particular details associated with their platform. You can just be like, oh, okay, the shorthand of teal independent is that climate-focused element, but other than that, there can be quite a few differences. Anyway, so usually the government doesn't need the support of anyone else other than its own party members to pass a bill in this chamber, but any member can introduce bills, private members' bills. Members are part of committees to examine what the government is doing, bring up questions, scrutinize the government through debate. So even though the teals, unless a bunch of people are missing, the teals can't be like, aha, we're going to vote down this thing, it's still, you know, valuable for anyone to be in the House of Reps. And then we also have the Senate, which instead of a mace has a black rod, which is also a thing that we get from the UK. The Usher of the Black Rod is a role that dates back to like the 1300s. There was the Order of the Garter. It's still it's the most senior order of chivalry in the British honour system. And in the UK, the Usher of the Black Rod is a knight, is knighted, and is a member of the most noble order of the Garter. Whereas in Australia, you advertise it on jobs.gov.au or whatever. Basically, like, the idea of the Sergeant-at-Arms in charge of security helps with maintaining the chamber, and in this one does things on the direction of the president, which I realised I probably should have done these slides in a different order. Someone says there are bills that don't need the two houses to agree on. That is only for referendum bills, and only under certain circumstances. So any other bill, you'd have to have both chambers agree. There is a deadlock resolution for referendum bills where the House, either House technically, can introduce a bill, and then the other chamber rejects it, and then they reintroduce it, and the other chamber rejects it again, and then you can take it to the Governor General and be like, hey, why don't we just let the electorate decide? Which, by convention, means that the House of Representatives has this power, because the House of Reps has the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister is not going to go to the Governor General and advise the Governor General, can you just take this to a referendum if the government has repeatedly voted it down? And the Senate has tried this. The Senate has tried to introduce its own bill that got rejected, and then I think it was like the 1930s or 40s. The Senate was like, hey, Governor General, do this. We're like, I know it's been rejected twice, but like, come on, we want it. And the Governor General was like, no. We've already had a referendum about this, a similar thing recently, and it was defeated. You're just trying too hard. No. So yeah. Someone asked, can you drink in Parliament? You can drink water, which is what I'm doing now. You're not allowed to eat or drink anything other than water in the chambers, but there is the members' bar outside of the chambers, so members can drink outside of the chambers, but still on parliamentary grounds. Yeah. Yes, the usher does still knock on the door. The president isn't dragged to their position, I believe, because their historical thing is not to do with any danger. Yeah, the fun thing is they knock on the door for an opening of Parliament. They knock on the door of the House of Reps to invite them into the upper house, because the King, and therefore Governor General, is not allowed in the lower house. It's a whole thing. King Charles I barged into the House of Commons in the 1600s. He had 400 armed men, and he's like, I want to arrest these 5 MPs. Tell me where they are. And since then, Parliament has asserted its privilege of like, no, don't come in here. You can't interrupt and interfere. We are independent from the influence of the monarch. King Charles I, by the way, was executed and beheaded for tyranny and treason in 1649. So his descendants and relatives thereof have avoided it since then. Someone asked, why is the Order of the Garter called that? There is a story, probably apocryphal, where the king, it was Edward III, I think, he was at court, a lady, her garter slipped down, and he got down to help put it back up, and people were like, oh, he's touching a lady's leg, whoa, shameful, whoa, scandalous. And he turns around and says, in French, I can't quite recall the exact French, but it basically translates to like dishonor or shame to he who thinks evil of it, or like, shame to he who thinks wrong of it. Like the idea being, he's just helping the lady with her dignity by helping her put the garter back up. He's not being salacious and weird. Don't think that ill of the king. Probably not real. But shame to he who evil thinks is in French on the crest, the coat for the Order of the Garter. Yeah. Anyway. Shout out to Bill Hayden, may he rest in peace. I've got his biography somewhere. I haven't read it yet. I read a little bit of it. Someone asked, how does a minority government work, and is it a better option for people-focused governance rather than wealth-based government? Well, it's up to you to think if it works better or not. Basically, right, a minority government, no party or coalition has a majority, so 76 or more. Last time we had that was Julia Gillard. She needed the support of Adam Bandt from... No, was it Adam Bandt in the Greens, or was it someone else? No, it was Adam Bandt, I'm pretty sure. And 3 or 4 independents. Something like that. Basically, right, to govern in our parliamentary system, you need to be able to pass legislation, which is a majority. And what that leads to is more negotiation. Because if you suddenly... if you just be like, cool, I don't have the numbers to pass everything, but I'll just be like, just do it anyway. Eventually, that won't go well. People will start blocking your legislation and might pass a motion of no confidence. Now, the thing is, from 1901 until the 1910 election, no party had a majority. There was a 3-way split, basically. There was the protectionists, the free trade, and Labour, and then there was protectionist, anti-socialist, whatever it was. We all know about George Reid. So it would be this rotating alliance, basically. Minority governments happen. I mean, there's one in Tasmania. You basically just need to get on board with some other members of the chamber and just negotiate that way. Scott Morrison had a minority government. He actually ended with 2 seats short of minority, but he needed was it Morrison or was it Malcolm? No, yeah, it was, because Malcolm Turnbull resigned, then we got Karen Phelps, and then she was like, I'll give you confidence and supply, meaning I won't vote down your government. But Morrison did end up having a bill passed that he didn't want because she sided with everyone else in the chamber on Medivac. So it's a challenge to an individual party to be in a minority government. It just requires them to reevaluate how they want to negotiate legislation, which they need to do on a regular basis anyway with the Senate, because they don't have a majority in the Senate almost ever. So it just brings that negotiation element into the House of Reps, which it was going to have to rely on in the Senate anyway. So, yeah. Anyway, how do plebiscites work? Plebiscites are, you're right, it's a nationwide opinion poll. They're non-binding, they're not about the Constitution, they're just like, hey, what do you think? And we've had very few. There were 2 on conscription, 1916 and 1917. There was the same-sex marriage plebiscite, and then there was also the one on the national anthem, where Waltzing Matilda came second, I think it was. And then only South Australia was the only one that voted for Song of Australia, which turned out to have written in Adelaide in the 1800s, which is why. But yeah, it was the 70s when they had that plebiscite on the national anthem. It didn't change until the 80s because Malcolm Fraser was just like, I don't want it to change. So it took until Bob Hawke, and he was like, actually, no, let's do it. So it's the idea of a plebiscite is really to... it's a very rare idea, but it is just to create that sort of political impetus of like, hey, the public wants this, so members should do it, should follow through. But that wasn't the case when it came to the what's it calls it, the national anthem. People were very concerned during the same-sex marriage one, thinking that, there's a lot of conservatives that openly said that they don't want this, so are they going to abide by the plebiscite results? And we found that most of them did. Anyway, someone's asked, will I ever run for office? Probably not. It's so time consuming. I don't want to do it. It would be so boring to be in Parliament all the time. Sittings can be so long. I'm so sorry. I think it's very interesting to learn about and talk about, but I don't want to do it. And I'd be away from my wife too much. And she has said, don't do that. So I'm like, yeah, fair enough. Anyway. Where was I? So, the Senate has a president. We don't have a prime minister in the Senate, except Asterix at one time. So, there is the leader of the government in the Senate, and then there's the leader of the opposition in the Senate as well, which is currently Penny Wong for the government and Michaela Cash for the coalition. Someone's asked, would I want any of my viewers to run for Parliament? Yeah. Go for it. Why not? What's stopping you? Do it. There's an election coming up. Why not? That's what I want. I want everyone to care. And if that involves running for Parliament, go for it. But also be aware that that is a very time-consuming and difficult thing to do. So I encourage you at the very least to maybe join a political party, volunteer, learn how it works, help support a candidate that you like. And someone said he'll run for Isle of Man Parliament, I bet. They only have like 4,000 voters per like electorate. It is a small island. It takes less than an hour to drive from one side to the end. I have considered it. I'm not kidding. Like, I love the Isle of Man so much. But like, if I were to run for Parliament, it would be in the Isle of Man. Yeah. Like, it's beautiful. 2, it's a small island, so like everything is just there. Where like, you know, when I visit, like my wife, she spent some of her childhood in the Isle of Man, so we went there, and she's like, oh, I remember this, and we hung out with some of her like family friends, and one of them was like, ugh, I had to drive 15 minutes somewhere. That's so far. I'm like, 15? You drive 15 minutes? You think that's far? Wait. And then, you know, we're mentioning, oh, we went to see such and such, like, the other day. And they're like, I always mean to go there, but I never have. And it's just like, what do you mean? Your entire island is like 45 minutes drive from north to south. Like, what are you doing on this Saturday? Go. Like, but it's so beautiful. And it's like, so if I were to run for Parliament, maybe one day in the future, when I've moved to the Isle of Man, and I'm like, yeah, why not? Like, it's small enough that like I could actually know, like get to know the electorate well. Like, being a member of the House of Reps, you have to be like, oh, my electorate has 110,000 voters in it. It's like, how can you ever possibly reasonably connect with a decent amount on a personal level? You'd be inundated all the time with information. Whereas, like, Isle of Man, it's like, yeah, I could actually get to know these people. Like, not 4,000 people, obviously, but I feel like I could, you know, actually feel like I'm talking to them. And I wouldn't have to travel very far, because as previously mentioned, the island is 45 minutes drive from north to south. Anyway. You have activated... Okay. Anyway. What was I saying? Someone says it helps to be a rich lawyer. I mean, obviously, yes, rich lawyers have money, but I would like to point out that less than 50% of Parliament is lawyers, and all sorts of different things, all sorts of different backgrounds. Someone's saying, what party? Look, the Isle of Man doesn't really have political parties. I mean, it does, but like it's like 3 members in the House of Keys are from political parties. The rest of them are independents. So like, oh, what a dream to just be like, I could just be myself. But I'm not going to do it. I don't want to move all the way to the other side of the world unless my wife really wants to. Yeah. Anyway. This is not about Tynwald. It's about the Australian Parliament. Let's talk about the crossbench. Yeah, so there's a bunch. The Senate, because it's proportional, that's where you're more likely to find minor parties and independents. One Nation, Greens, Independents, Jackie Lambie Network. Ralph Babbitt is part of the United Australia Party, even though that's not a registered political party, but it doesn't actually matter in terms of like party registration. Yeah. But this is where you're more likely to find, like for minor parties and independents, the idea is to get the balance of power. If you're the government, you almost never have a majority in the Senate. So to pass legislation, you're going to have to convince either the opposition or enough of the crossbench to get something through. So that's where that collaborative element comes from. There is not impetus. There is this sort of mitigating factor in terms of the government is like, well, we got a majority in the House of Representatives, therefore we have a mandate. So sometimes you'll find political parties will, even though they're opposed to the government's agenda, kind of concede every now and again because it's like, well, you're more popular than us. We're gonna pick and choose our battles. And also it could be like the government is like, hey, I have this legislation, here it is, and the Senate goes, someone on either the opposition or crossbench goes, okay, we'll pass it if you go through like these demands. And the thing is, any amendments made there have to go back to the House, where the House of Reps, with usually a government majority, can then just like vote through or down what it wants. So there is that mitigating factor where the crossbench or opposition can ask for concessions and amendments, but they do have to keep in mind that they can only ask for so much because the government still has the final say. So there's still that massive amount of like negotiation that can happen. There's definitely concessions that happen every single parliament, and the crossbench really matters in terms of its negotiating power with the government when it comes to the Senate. So really consider who you want to vote for in both chambers, because this is very important for terms of the political makeup and direction that the government takes. You know, the more conservative crossbenchers are, the more conservative the legislation is steered. The more progressive crossbenchers are, the more progressive that amendments and legislation is steered, to a degree. So, anyway, but the difference is can't introduce money bills. So that's also a restriction on the Senate. The government, formed in the lower house, ultimately has the control over money, but bills that aren't to do with money can be introduced here. So, regulatory things can be introduced here. And private members' bills can be introduced here. So the more non-government members there are, the more non-government business is discussed and introduced in the Senate. So again, genuinely consider the fact that there will be a more politically diverse makeup of the Senate, and consider that when you vote, right? Anyway. Where's my water bottle gone? Usually there are 2 chairs in the Senate. Where is it? Where's a helpful picture? Oh yeah, there are 2 seats. I was expecting 3. Good question. I don't know. Anyway, where was I? Let's see. Yeah, look, I don't remember what the actual statistics are. Lawyer and former lobbyists are actually the highest former professions of members of parliament, but the earlier point that I couldn't remember what the statistic was. I was like, it's not all lawyers, but like it is actually, broadly speaking, there is a more diverse range of people in parliament than people think. Like I've got an episode. I do the occasional interview with members of parliament, and sometimes I'm not particularly happy with them because I'm like, be more succinct. and maybe I could prime them a little bit more better to explain more specifically what I want. But I did one with Stephen Bates, and asked him, like, do members of parliament get any training? Because you can be from any background, and he was from a retail background. He used to work in an Apple store until he got elected. In fact, he got elected and then still had a couple of weeks at the Apple store to finish off. And so I've got an interview with him about, like, what training do members of parliament get? That is one of my best interviews, I think, in terms of... One, I think it's an interesting subject. Two, very useful for people to know that you can be from any background. And three, also, like, he actually answered the questions in the way that I wanted him to. And James asked, what percentage are lawyers? Good question. The aph.gov.au, the Australian Parliament House website, has statistics. It will publish statistics every now and again for, like, the 41st Parliament, the 42nd Parliament, and you'll need to look that up. Anyway, I think there's an election for the Deputy Speaker as well, but I can't recall exactly how that works. Anyway, this slide, how many more have I got? Look, there aren't just members of Parliament. There's also the clerks, who are experts in the standing orders, and they advise members, the Speaker and President, and just any old member about, like, what the standing orders are. Because there's so much, like, procedure and order and nonsense. Not nonsense. There's a lot of technicalities to Parliament, because it has hundreds of years of history and precedent established in the House of Commons, and the UK, so the clerks are very knowledgeable nerds. They're officers of the House, and so they're not members, unlike the Speaker, so they don't have to worry about their job at the election, and they can be there for years, they can be there for decades. So yeah, how do you become a clerk? You wait 20 years for someone else to retire. Look, they're basically, like, they often have a law background. They don't always have to, but there's lots of people that work for the chamber, like the papers office. Like, you know, there's lots of behind the scenes stuff that happens. Like, you know, there's the table of the House, where, you know, this image of Tony Abbott he's speaking from, like, he would table papers, reports, petitions, and then that has to be, you know, recorded, archived, publicly published, etc. And so there are people working for the chamber who can understand how it all works, and eventually maybe get apply for, you know, assistant deputy clerk or whatever it is, and work your way up to be like, I understand how Parliament works. I can assist people when they ask me questions about it. But, like, the top people usually end up having law degrees, not necessarily though. Yeah. Who holds the most authority in the Senate chambers other than the presiding officers? Leader of government business. Leader of the government in the Senate. Pardon me. So sorry. Also, Hansard. Hansard is your friend. You know, members can be like, I think blah, blah, blah. Or they go to an election and they're like, we care about blah, blah, blah. So, like... If you want to be like, do you? You can look up the Hansard. You know, have they actually said anything about that on the record? So you can look up basically everything that is said in the chambers, in debates and speeches, and yeah, find out what your local member has been talking about. Find out what they've been talking about. I'm so sorry for coughing. Yeah, it's historic. It goes back, like, all the way. A fun fact about Hansard is that it's actually a family name. Thomas Hansard was a printer and reporter for the House of Commons in the early 1800s. He actually bought that business off another man called William Cobbett, who had created effectively the format of the modern Hansard. It was originally illegal to report on the debates and speeches of Parliament in England, And people were jailed for it. There was an underground business of trying to sell newspapers with like censored names of like, you want to know what like such and such said, and what was it? Yeah, and basically it became legal in the late 1700s to report, and so there became this like competitive business of like who can like report the most, who can have the most detail about what's being said in Parliament. I mean, the decisions of Parliament are always like, you always had that recorded, like people were like, oh, this is a new law now. That wasn't a mystery. It's just, you know, if a member wanted to say something, they didn't want it to be written down in case they said something that was like maybe seditious to the king, so you couldn't examine them outside of Parliament. But then it was like, okay, well, it doesn't look good if we keep jailing journalists. So yeah, Cobbett invented the Hansard. Cobbett went bankrupt in the early 1800s. Thomas Hansard bought him out and then reprinted the previous volumes of Cobbett's Records of Parliamentary Debates and then slapped his name on it, Hansard's Records of Parliamentary Debates. And that rebranding stuck. People, like, it was informal. He was like effectively a freelancer. Like, he was doing this incredibly detailed report and selling it, and there were other people doing it as well as like a competition, but the Parliament eventually was just like, oh, well, his is just really effective, so we'll just purchase him. We'll just have like a ongoing contract where like, oh, can we have like X amount of copies of this year? You know, like they were effectively kind of subsidizing the fact that he was making this as an external person. And they would just refer to it colloquially as the Hansard. It is actually Parliamentary Debates. And then Australian colonies before Federation would refer to it as the Hansard. And then they hired people to do Hansard. Originally, Tasmania didn't do it until the 1970s for some reason. But like the first couple of decades of like the Victorian Parliament, they just sort of outsourced it to the newspaper. So the Argus was, I believe it was the Argus, it was like the record of parliamentary debates in Victoria in the early days. And then they hired Hansard people in-house. And the fun thing is, Hansard was a family name. His family was involved in it. His descendants were involved in it for a little while. But they stopped being part of the production in 1889 in the UK. And it was 89? And then it was like 1909. It was like 20 years later that the UK, the House of Commons, officially hired someone in-house as a staff member for the House of Commons. Not like, oh, we just accommodate an external person coming in and making this. They hired someone officially to be in-house Hansard. And it's still known as the Hansard, even though at that point, the Hansard family had not been involved in it for 20 years. And it should be called the Cobbett. So, yeah. Good question. Actually, I think there was a public gallery originally in the early days of the House of Commons. Not the early days. There was like this weird shift, this gradual shift of acceptability, of like where people are allowed to be in terms of their access to the UK Parliament. But Australian parliaments, as far as I'm aware, have had public galleries since the start, or near the start. Ooh. Actually, I don't know about early colonial ones. I know that the West Australian one, they like really like started it very early, and they would like dress up a bit regal, even though it was like 5 or 6 guys in a small cottage, because it was like this is a small colony. Nothing's really happening right now. Party whips are organisational people. They're there to help manage party business. They convene with each other. They convene with the Senate. The House Speaker and the President of the Senate to work out the order of business of the day. If whips were to disappear, you would hope that other people were just more organised, and the leader of the House would be like, "Oh no, I have more paperwork to do." it's party whips are just like an organizational tool that doesn't need to exist if you don't have political parties. Because in the past, not everyone was in a political party. We used to have parliaments that were entirely independent, not federally, but like on a colonial level. So, like, party whips weren't a necessary thing. They are a useful organizational thing. Yeah. Anyway. The big golden mason parliament is a symbol of authority of the chamber. That's it. We're nearing the end of my PowerPoint. Oh my goodness. Good. We've only been doing this for an hour. It's only been an hour and 10 minutes. It feels so much longer. So yes. A bit of lag. In terms of... Yeah, there we go. So, yeah, basically, right? A bill cannot become an act of parliament. It cannot be a law until both chambers agree. So, really important to remember that when you go to an election, you're electing people of both chambers. The makeup of them will be different. The political parties of them will be different. The people in there will have different views, and it is a collective negotiation where both chambers get to introduce ideas outside of what the government wants, to scrutinise what the government wants. It's not just about who becomes the government, but that still is incredibly influential as to ultimately what happens. But I really want everyone to understand, hey, both chambers is very, very important, right? Someone asked, do senators have more comfortable chairs? Honestly, they look the same to me from this image. Members, yeah. Anyway, yeah. So, once both chambers agree, it gets sent to the Governor-General, who is currently Sam Mostyn, who represents the King, King Charles III, because we're a constitutional monarchy. So, technically the King can come and sign bills into law if he wants, but he's the King of, like, 14, 15 different Commonwealth realms, and then there's dependencies underneath that. So the Isle of Man is not its own distinct Commonwealth realm. It's not part of the UK, but it's called a Crown dependency, like Guernsey and Jersey? The Channel Islands, there's like 3 places there. So, yeah. Someone says the WA Legislative Assembly looks so comfy. I believe it is. Though I've been told that the Legislative Council of the WA is more comfy. Actually, I've heard both. People have different opinions on that one. So yeah. That's the final step, everyone. Oop, yeah. And then, look, you can go on the Australian Parliament House website. I think just aph.gov.au/divisions. I think it might just be that simple of an URL. You can look up the divisions and find out how people have voted. But if you want a simplified version where you don't want to look up every single division and go through all the procedural stuff, you can go to theyvoteforyou.org.au. The AU is important because it's the UK version, I'm pretty sure. And you can look up what members of Parliament have actually done and what they've said and how they've voted. And so you can collate them into sort of categories like, have they consistently voted for or against investing more in renewable energy? Or have they consistently voted for or against increasing housing affordability? Or all sorts of different sort of legislative elements. And then sometimes it's like, we don't know how this person has voted because they haven't collated enough data. Members are not always present for every single vote. Some things you'd be like, I know that this person has a policy on this, but this website just doesn't have enough data to definitively say that they've consistently voted for or against because they've either only voted on this topic once or not. A very useful resource. As we're going into an election, theyvoteforyou.org.au. It is the easiest way to sort of summarize a lot of information about the voting records of members of Parliament. It's not super comprehensive, but if you wanted that, aph.gov.au, Australian Parliament House website. You can look up the divisions, you can look up the Hansard. There is ways to find, basically, everything is transparent. There is way more data and information out there than you'll ever need to know or care about or want to read even I, a big nerd, sometimes go, this committee report is boring. Scroll down. Come on, just give me the summarize of the recommendations, you know? So, yeah, like, that's the thing. Look it up. Anyway, question time. Oh, gosh. How do territories become states? Does the federal parliament need to agree? How do we add new states? There is an element in the Constitution about new states, and I realize that I cannot recall it off by heart. Because we all expect me to have this memorized. I feel like by the time that I find it, James v. Commonwealth in the comments is going to have told me already what the answer is. And I switched tabs, so I don't know what you're writing right now, James, but thank you for being in the chat. Where is it? New states. Chapter 121. The Parliament may admit to the Commonwealth or establish new states, and may upon admission or establishment make or impose such terms and conditions, including the extent of representation, in either House of Parliament as it sees fit. Oh, okay, that's not the best one. Formation of new states. A new state may be formed by separation of territory from a state, but only with the consent of the Parliament thereof. So if you were to split New South Wales into two, New South Wales Parliament wouldn't have to agree. Yeah, and if you were to combine two states, you'd need the parliaments of both states to agree. What? Yeah. So, it doesn't mention anything about a referendum. Anyway. Yeah, okay. It requires an act of parliament. That's what I suspected. There is that element that I mentioned, that the parliament can decide what the representation of a new state gets. So the original 6 are guaranteed a minimum of 5 members in the House of Reps and equal representation in the Senate. So if the Northern Territory were to become a state, not guaranteed that it would have that happen. So the Northern Territory did have a referendum, I think it was in the late 90s, I think it was then, being like, hey, should we become a state? Should we pursue statehood? And it was narrowly defeated, I think it was, or was it reasonably defeated? Basically, like some of the details were like, hey, I don't think we're going to get the best deal out of this, because they weren't going to get 12 senators. I think they were like, we might get 3. Yeah, that's not enough, because that's less. That's just one more than they already have. So, you know, the Northern Territory can become a state if it so wishes, with a lot of effort, but that could just end up meaning that they get 1 or 2 more representatives in Parliament, and it might not be worth it. Or they could negotiate a little bit better. It's a bit difficult for them to do, because the Northern Territory has very little in terms of population, and that's kind of the problem when it comes to, you know, that's the thing that it wants to overcome, is that it's because it has such a small population. It's like, hey, look after us better. And if we were a state, maybe that would work. You know, because they don't have much negotiation power. If you lose the 2 seats in the Northern Territory, you've only lost 2 seats in the Northern Territory. So like places like New South Wales and Queensland like get a lot of attention, because you win or lose dozens or scores of seats there. Yeah. So maybe in the future it will be a state, who knows. Okay, well, quick little note. I know I'm a bit far back, but the Manx Parliament is not the oldest parliament. It's the oldest continuous parliament. I think it's Iceland or something that had an older one by about 20-ish, 30-ish years, but it's not continuous. That's the asterisk. Not the longest continuous known parliament in the world. So, there have been older parliaments. Yeah. Okay. James is not AI. There's 2 Jameses in the chat. Ah, okay. Well, one of them is good, and I don't know who the other one is. Aussie Agenda says, can I make my house a micronation? The answer is yeah, of course. But the thing about a micronation is that it's not recognized as a sovereign nation by another nation. So, like, anyone can do it. That's the thing. There's no rules about micronations, because they're not real. The micronations is basically anyone saying, my house is now a nation, and people going, okay, cool. Look up the Principality of Y. I think it's a principality. He kind of dresses up as a wizard sometimes. I think that's the guy. He had a problem with the local council to do with a driveway and a nature strip. I'm really explaining this poorly, but he's kind of turned it into a bit of an art piece as well as a long-term protest. Someone's mentioned something about WA. Oh no, you're talking about becoming independent, not micronations. Oh, where is it though? No, that's an actual... Let's see, will that focus? If anyone's aware, there was a micronation, only they don't like it being called a micronation, because they don't like that association with people who are making fun of their bedrooms, being like, it's a new nation. The Hutt River, the Principality of Hutt River, was a attempt at an independent sovereign nation north of Geraldton, from like the 1970 or 1971 until like the early 2020, and it was a disgruntled wheat farmer called Prince Leonard, and I want to write a book about him, and I've got a coin. I just showed it to you and then I put it down and now I don't know what I did with it. He minted his own coins. I collect coins, and I have Hutt River currency. I have a bunch of it because I love it so much, and I want to write a book about it. I actually interviewed a bunch of people associated with it to talk to them about it, and then I have so much going on that I had to put that book on hold. But one day, hopefully, I will write a book about the Hutt River because I love it so much. Okay. But how do states become independent like their own country? In 1933, WA had a referendum, and 2/3 of WA was like, let's secede, let's leave. And then they went to the UK, and the UK was like, no. Because wibbly wobbly, legality, whatever. One of the reasonings was like, you're kind of asking us to alter the federal constitution without asking the rest of the country. So I suppose you could have, because there is an element about altering, like in the provisions in the Constitution about referendums, if there's a referendum that would alter like the boundaries and representation of a state, then that state specifically would have to agree to it as well. So there's actually a triple majority required in that case instead of the usual double majority. And so if WA wanted to secede properly, I suppose we would have to have a national referendum where we go, can we please leave? And then not only would a majority of Australia need to agree, yeah, you can leave, but WA would also need to be like, yay, we can finally go. That triple majority prevents us basically from ganging up on states and being like, screw you. So if we were like, I don't think Tasmania should be part of us, and we got 90% of the population to vote for Tasmania to leave, and 5 out of 6 states went, yeah, get rid of Tasmania, and then Tasmania goes, no, doesn't meet the triple majority. So anyway, it would not require a referendum to change the number of senators represented each state in the Senate, but if you do increase the number of senators, you have to increase the numbers of the House of Reps. No, I would not consider doing election night coverage, so sorry, because I will be drunk. I will be super drunk. I will be with my friends being unbelievably drunk. That's the honest truth. My friends have an election party. I go there. I watch Anthony Green. I wish that I was him, and I get very, very drunk. It's like my Super Bowl. It's like like the intensity of watching a football match, but I'm watching like election swings, and people are like, "Oh, what's going on?" I'm like, don't worry. Like it's Queensland. Queensland like gets counted early and it's lots of seats, but like that's not indicative of the rest of the country. They're like, okay, cool, because of time zones. Because they start counting earlier. Yeah. So it doesn't. The Queensland is not a representative shift of how an election is going necessarily. Anyway, so sorry. Anyway, Hutt Hi, Aussie Agenda, you're back. Legally, weegally. I love it. Okay, Pamba, you're lost on proportional representation. Okay. Well, it's... In a single member electorate, you don't have proportional representation. So it's winner take all. If someone gets 51% of the vote, they win, right? Proportional means it only works in multi-members. So it's not for the House of Reps, it's for the Senate. Because you're electing 6 senators, right? So if Labor gets a proportion of the vote, those 6 seats, a proportion of those 6 seats go to Labor based off how well it did. And there's a little bit of complicated maths involved. You know, if Labor gets 30% of the vote and Liberals get 30% of the vote, and then some minor parties get a smaller proportion of the vote, you expect, like, you know, Labor and Liberal to get, you know, maybe 2, I guess, and then, you know, a minor party and independent, whichever 2 are most popular, to, you know, fill in those 6 seats. So that's how proportional representation works. The more seats there are, the more, like, more proportional it can get, because there's more nuance in the percentage votes that you can get to get a percentage of those seats. Because if you only have 2 seats, like the Isle of Man Parliament, where each electorate returns only 2 members, right, you can have that situation where, you know, one gets 55% of the vote, one gets 45%, 2 most popular candidates, bam, right? So you can elect them both. But if it's a 3-way competition, right, let's say, you know, with, like, Isle of Man, 3-way competition, 35, 30, 25? Oh, gosh, whatever. My maths is terrible. But, you know, 2 popular, 1 not so popular. Well, the 2 most popular still get in, right? But if you have, like, a 6-way race and there's only 2 spots, you can see how, like, that's not very complicated and how much of a percentage you'd need to win that seat. Like, it's still very competitive. So if you have 12 spots to win, right, you can get more subdivisions, you know, like more nuance, right? You can be like, okay, well, this person only won 10% of the vote, but because there's so many seats to get, that 10% still gets to be represented down at the bottom as, like, the last seat, you know? So proportional representation, the more seats available in an electorate, so like the Senate, that's the entire state, the more diverse and complicated you can get with your representation. United Australia Party is not going to form government because they're not a registered political party. Oh gosh, all of a sudden so many people have said things. Am I drunk well below 11 p.m. or the result? I mean, yeah, I'm drunk by like 8 p.m. Counting starts at 6. Anyway, everyone should have good old election parties. They're good fun. You don't need to drink, though. Like, just saying. Look, stop asking me questions about political donations, because I'm not going to ask. I'm politically neutral in my discussions here. So wait, is this starting to get a bit foggy? So I'm not going to talk about specific policies. How you feel about those policies, that's up to you. So that's what you should decide and have a conversation about. I'm not going to tell you for or against any particular policy. Anyway. Theoretically, if the whole parliament is independent, how would government be formed? Well, probably the same way that they do it on the Isle of Man in Tynwald Parliament, or the ACT. Because to get to be government, right, political parties are not a necessary element of parliament. They're just a thing we created for the sake of ease of, you know, communicating. So basically, right, to be government, you need to have the support of a majority of the chamber. Right? And how can you do that? Well, you could either have a political party that has been like, hey, look, more than half of us are aligned in one way as a group. That demonstrates very clearly that we will consistently have the confidence of the lower house. Or you could, at the start of the ACT, after each election, they have a vote to decide who gets to be the chief minister. you know, because a motion of no confidence can remove that person. Why not just have a vote to install that person? So same for the Isle of Man, where they have almost no political parties. They basically, like, the chamber decides, the House of Keys goes, that person's this position, that person's that position. In colonial areas as well, they also had independent premiers, and it was basically just like, well, this faction supports me, so governor, appoint me. Like, I can kind of point out to be like, hey man, these 50 people like me, those 20 people don't like me, that's a bigger amount. So the governor could be like, yeah, cool. So yeah, political parties are a thing that we invented for the sake of convenience. They are not a necessary element of Parliament in any shape or form, except for section, whatever one it is, for filling in vacancies in the Senate. I can't remember which section of the Constitution was amended in 1977. Anyway, I don't know about... I do not have an opinion on fixed 4-year terms, but all the states have them now, so it happens in Australia. Anyway. Oh, gosh. Any idea why civics isn't more well taught at high school? Good question. I would like to change that. I think it is because it is a more recent necessary element of the curriculum. Like I said way earlier in the stream, it became more compulsory in like 2016. So there's a lot of teachers that were not taught civics and politics in school, and because it is a part of the very vast curriculum, they've got all these other things to teach, they're not that confident because they have to learn it from scratch to then tell children. So I've had teachers say to me things that are so wrong, confidently wrong. It's very awkward. To be fair, that's not usually, like, teachers do not usually come up to me and say things that are entirely wrong, but it is a thing that has happened. So, yeah, like, it's just a thing that needs to be adjusted over time, is just that increased encouragement of current teachers to learn and incorporate and improve that. And there's actually a recent committee report that said there should be more funding for civics and citizenship, and increase sort of Parliamentary Education Office budget. So in the future, things will be better. People know more. Yeah. Aston asks, how are ministers chosen? Thanks, James, for telling me which section of the Constitution. Premier on a state, Prime Minister for the federal Parliament, you know, be like, hey, I'm the leader of this group that has a majority, and then the Prime Minister would go to the Governor General and be like, I would like to have this person appointed to be this position, X, Y, and Z. So, yeah, it's basically like, hey, I want insert member of Parliament here to be Minister for Environment, Minister for Housing, etc. And then the Governor General for the federal Parliament, or Governor for a state Parliament, would then appoint that person, and then technically be able to revoke that. But they would stop someone from being a minister on the advice of the Prime Minister or Premier, usually. And ministers can be from other parties. In 1901 to 1910, no party had a majority, so there was this, like, agreement where they would basically be shuffling around. And so, you know, Labour... I think it was Chris Watson, the very first Labour Prime Minister in 1904. He was like, none of my members are, like, very experienced to be Attorney General. Like, Billy Hughes would go on to be Labour Attorney General later, but at that point in time, he's like, I'm too green in this. I don't have the experience. So I think it was the Attorney General that they chose from the protectionists. I think that's what they did. But there are definitely examples where it's like, hey, I know you're from a different political party, but, like, let's go. Like, we need the numbers. I should have actually just said the ACT, because up until just October last year, the Greens had been in a power sharing agreement with Labour for multiple terms, where, like, as part of it, some Labour members would be ministers and some Green members would be ministers, and then some Labour members would be backbenchers and some Green members would be backbenchers or crossbenchers. So the ACT actually had, for several years, ministers shared between Labour and Greens, but they've adjusted their agreement now. So Greens are a bit like, we're back on the backbench or crossbench, so we can have a different way in which we negotiate and scrutinise and participate in Parliament. So yeah. Anyway. Look, I think parliamentary question time can be an effective tool. I actually think it's very interesting to watch because you do get to see how some people are not good at it sometimes. Like, there is a skill to question time. Look, you only really get to see the more performative elements because those are the clips that are interesting, but a lot of it is not super interesting in terms of like drama. It is, and especially in like the Senate or like legislative councils, question time can be a more like information gathering exercise instead of like trying to be like, you did blah 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 wrong and I want to air this grievance like without like any notice of motion of this. So it is a mixed bag. It depends on who is asking a question and responding to the question, but I still think it's an important thing. Like, yeah, I think people should give question time the bit more of a benefit of the doubt until they actually watch some non-controversial question time. Anyway. No, Pamba, yeah, there was some buzz about the idea that the LNP will win a bunch of seats in the upcoming election because polls are saying that they will. But as I always say in these live streams, I don't predict election results. There's still who knows how many months left. Things can change, but LNP is Liberals. The coalition is at its lowest seat share since like World War II or something. So they're likely to gain seats potentially. But then again, maybe not. I don't know. I am not the electorate. I'm but one person, so could. Okay, Not a Time Lord has already asked about could someone be expelled, and then James has already explained yes. The federal parliament had the ability to expel members, like not just be like leave the chamber, be like you're no longer elected, go, your seat is vacant, and they only did that once. They only exercised that power once in the 1910s. I think it was 1918 or thereabouts. Billy Hughes was a big old imperialist, loved Britain so much, and that was an era where like Ireland had not yet created the Irish Free State, had not yet created the Republic of Ireland, so there was lots of revolutionaries, and there was an Irish MP who said seditious things where he supported an Irish Republic, and Billy Hughes was like, out, go, and kicked him out by majority vote, and then he lost his by-election. He couldn't return. And then they amended the Parliamentary Privileges Act in 1987, I want to say, or 80s. I don't have to be exact. You can double check me if you like. But yeah, Parliament no longer has that power. That is a legislative restriction it has put on its own powers, because its powers are, until the Parliament changes them, based off the House of Commons. I think they're meant to be until otherwise changed. I think they're meant to be frozen at where the powers and privileges of the House of Commons were at 1901 or something. Yeah, so they could reinstate that, but that's clearly something that could be misused. So they don't. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I hear that Anthony Green is actually retiring not long from now. I heard that like a year and a half ago, and he's still doing it, so I don't know, but maybe he will end up having his own little election party where he retires and he lets someone else do it and then goes, I would have done that better. I would have touched the board differently. Who knows? I don't look forward to him retiring because he's great. But I love the idea of him just putting his feet up at some point and just being like, I get to enjoy this one from watching it on TV instead of having to do it. Yeah, I know. I'd be sad. It was a question and I can't remember what's the context. What? Yeah. Who could possibly replace him? ABC, I'm looking at you. I'm not going to be able to do that. Um, yeah, Pegs on says, hypothetically, if a party does win exactly 76 seats, do they pick someone else from the opposition to be speaker? Sometimes, yeah, honestly. There have been multiple times where the government, because the speaker doesn't need to be a member of the government, and you don't really want to be relying on the speaker. The thing is, the speaker, you can't actually sign a contract to force a member of parliament to vote anyway. But when you're in a political party, they're like, hey, these are the rules of the party you vote with along with us, unless in certain circumstances. And if you don't vote in the same way as the rest of us, you get kicked out of the party. But you can't legally bind that person to do that. They can be like, cool. I mean, I'll do that. But if I really disagree with you, I am totally within my legal parliamentary rights to just vote against you. Parties frown on that. So it's discouraged and doesn't really happen, usually. But speakers are not, not necessarily expected to always go along with the government, and there have been times where government legislation has actually been defeated by the speaker's tie-breaking vote. I can't recall a federal example of that, but there's one of the courts. There was Charles Court and Richard Court in WA. One of them is the older one. I think it's Charles Court was the one in the 70s. And he wanted to amend the Electoral Act so that you couldn't vote if you were illiterate, which would not affect many people, but it would affect a few people in a certain, mostly a specific kind of demographic that was not a big fan of him. It was contentious. The Nationals were not super on board with it because he was the leader of the Liberal Party, and the Speaker voted it down. And he got so mad. He was fuming in the party room, and he was like, I'm going to kick you out. I'm going to stop you from being Speaker. And I think as the only woman in the Liberal Party at that point in time had a more level head and was like, hey, you know that he's not actually bound to vote with you. Like, that's his job. Like, speakers have voted down legislation before. He's just doing his job, and so that he didn't get kicked out of the Liberal Party. Keep kicking my microphone. I am not a sociologist, unfortunately. Okay. Yeah, I didn't realize that. I keep thinking of people like, can this happen? I'm like, yeah, let me think of a historic example that happened 50 years ago. And someone's like, this happened 10 years ago. I'm like, oh, yeah. Anyway. John Burkow, what an amazing speaker. He's on Cameo. You can get cameos from him where he's like, order. They cost so much money. Don't buy one for me. That'll be way too much money. If you are going to spend that much money on me, spend it on my Patreon instead. Sorry. Yes. I don't know what the PM can do in terms of ordering the AFP around. There is definitely the Prime Minister is in charge of the executive, and there's the Governor General is nominally the head of the armed forces, but because the Governor General acts on the advice of the Prime Minister doesn't need parliamentary approval to go to war. I think the Prime Minister can be like, yeah, we're going to war now. What exactly the broad powers of the Prime Minister is difficult to summarize, because there was what was it? There's this basically half of the law is delegated legislation, so a lot of nuance of legislation and how it operates is left up to the Minister of the day to decide, so there's the social media ban for under 16s is a very useful way for explaining this, right? So if you have a bit of legislation that's like, we're going to ban social media for those under 16. How are you going to do that? What regulations do social media platforms need to adhere to abide by that law, and what social media platforms are included in that law, right? And if you just wrote into legislation Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, right, and then someone just made Blawbo express or whatever, and you're like, oh no, that's not in my legislation. I didn't write this brand new social media platform into my Act of Parliament. You'd have to bring it back in and go through the process, which can take a couple of months if you don't prioritize it. Like whole three readings and three readings again in both chambers. That's inefficient. So what you do is go, okay, we have criteria where like the social media websites can be banned if they adhere to X, Y, and Z, and it's up to the minister to decide if a social media platform is within those guidelines, and then can be like, okay, as an executive decision, we're banning that, right? Because otherwise people could just keep making websites and you'd be like, that's not written into the legislation. So there's that delegated element of it where it has many different names like ordinance or secondary legislation, etc. It has the same legal force as legislation, but it is subservient to that act that defines it. So the legislation around that goes, well, it's banning for those under 16, and there are these criteria. If the minister goes, I'm going to ban every website for those under 18, that's not within the confines of the law, and so the court goes, you can't apply that. So there is that. There's like a lot of elements of legislation that delegates the actual nuance of running it to the minister at hand. So there are lots of decisions that are up to ministers, and some of those are built into legislation, and some of those are just like directing various departments. Because I can't think of any example that isn't more contemporary in my mind, other than what I just said about social media. When Gough Whitlam came into power in 1972, before they'd even finalised everyone else's seats, him and his deputy were like, give us all of the ministry. They called it the triumvirate, and he was just like, executive. We're no more conscription. We're going to pull troops out of like Vietnam. We're going to do this. We're going to recognise China. Like, he just went mad. He was just like, it's been 23 years since Labour has been in power. Finally, we have the reins of the executive. And so there is actually quite a lot that the Prime Minister can just do, but still within the confines of what legislation says the Prime Minister can do. He can't executive order things and just make them whole cloth. There's still legislative and constitutional boundaries to this executive power. It's not like Trump. Trump has a lot of power that is just, gosh. The chat's going off, but someone's asking some great questions about the separation of powers. So when it comes to delegated power, right? So say the minister is like, I want to add a new social media website to this list that is banned, right? All delegated legislation still has to go before Parliament. Like, it gets tabled, and then Parliament reviews it and has like a timeline where it can disallow it. So Parliament is the ultimate authority over legislation, and so if the minister is doing things that the Parliament is like, I don't think you're allowed to do that, or I disagree with that, it is possible for a majority to vote down and disallow delegated legislation. But then also there is the courts that, again, if like a minister oversteps their legislative power, can be taken to a court, and the decision is sort of dealt with there. The court can't direct a minister to be like, you should make this decision, but it can be like, you didn't do this decision within the confines of your legal power, so we can't enforce that. You can't make it happen. So I'm really not going to be able to remember this well. Billy McMahon tried to get rid of the Aboriginal tent embassy in the 1970s. He was like directing police, and I think he was meant to. There's this thing called the Government Gazette, where like all those decisions are published as well, and he didn't gazette the decision to like direct the police to dismantle the Aboriginal tent embassy. So that got challenged, and it's like, oh no, that was illegal, you couldn't do that. So then he then it popped up again. And so he's like, okay, fine, I will go through and do it properly and legally. And so published it, like he sent the directive off like just after midnight or something. So it's like, no one will notice, no one will see, but I technically did it. And it became a persistent problem, and Gough Whitlam was like, hey, what if I actually sit down and talk to these people instead? And so there was that distinction in terms of the two political parties that helped Gough Whitlam gain power in 1972, because Billy McMahon was like, I don't want to talk to Indigenous people, and I don't want them to be protesting outside Parliament, and I want them to be quiet. And Gough Whitlam was like, hey, you have problems, let me hear them. So sometimes when the government does things, the opposition goes, oh, we'll make a point of difference. And I keep yeah. Anyway, look, how long have I been doing this for? I've been doing this for nearly 2 hours, and my throat is getting a bit sore, so I'm going to go soon. Maybe Leo Puglisi can replace Anthony Green. Wouldn't that be hilarious? Okay. Gough Whitlam didn't renege on like everything though. Like he actually did do some serious reform for Indigenous land rights in the Northern Territory in the 1970s, and followed through with a lot of these things. Just saying. I mean, you're allowed to dislike Gough Whitlam as much as you like, but I'm just saying he didn't renege on everything. That's probably overly pedantic of me. As James is also pointing out, yes, the courts create common law, and that can be overridden by Parliament. So there's like common law, delegated law, and statute law in Parliament. So the courts can be like, we can make a decision in this case on how this law is interpreted and applied, and set a precedent there. And the Parliament go, I don't actually like that, so they can change the law and direct it. So then next time a certain case happens, they get a new outcome. So long as that was within the confines of the Constitution. Like if the court goes, hey, that actually is not within your constitutional power, the Parliament can't just make a new law and go, actually it is now. They would have to change the Constitution for that effect to happen the way that they wanted. So there are plenty of laws that have changed as a response to court cases to be like, that's not the outcome we wanted, we're going to change it. But in 1951, there was a referendum to be like, hey, can the Commonwealth have powers to deal with communists? Because Menzies tried to ban the Communist Party, and the court was like, no, you can't do that because the act basically supposes the idea of guilt of someone in the Communist Party before you've actually proven that. So you can't. That's like reversing the process of proof. Burden of proof on someone to do punitive things to them. He failed. He basically failed to pass the referendum in 1951. Okay. Someone asks, how are electorates drawn up? There is a bunch of details to that I feel like I can't explain well. So they assess population growth. There's things they assess, also things like geographical boundaries and borders, like as well. And then also there's a lot of consultation as well, like any proposal to alter electoral boundaries, as far as I'm aware, gets sent to the public, and you're allowed to publicly comment. And I didn't, but I was very disappointed. Because I believe it was the seat of Corangamite, which I'm not entirely sure if it still exists or not. They were going to rename. They were proposing to rename. I think it was Corangamite, to change it to Cox, which is my last name. I don't live in that state. I think it's Victoria. I'm not entirely sure. Someone please double check. But I thought that would be so good. I'm not going to run for Parliament, but if I did, could you imagine the seat of Cox? And my name's Cox. Cox for Cox. Vote for Cox. Everyone loves Cox and Cox. Come on. It's with an X. Anyway. Yeah, technically a motion of no confidence is not a binding thing. It is a way to demonstrate, hey, we have the numbers to override you if you wish to try and govern differently. You don't actually have to resign in a motion of no confidence. It's more of a convention, but it's kind of like a weird thing to try and defy, because like it is a clear sign that's like, we have the numbers to stop you from doing things and take the legislative reins away from you. So it's not in your best interest to defy a motion of no confidence, because it kind of doesn't help you, because then otherwise the chamber might just become more hostile and you might just keep losing things. Anyway. Yay. Anyway, I'm glad that your Year 6 students are enjoying my videos. Yes, someone says, Constitution, statute, common law. Yeah, in terms of important. Constitution, most important. Common law, down at the bottom, which is really... I mean, it's not funny, it's kind of sad. But they're, if anyone is aware, sovereign citizens are people who are quite divorced from reality. And they have a bunch of bizarre ideas of how the law works. They're the kind of people that you see viral videos of, trying to be like, nope, you can't give me a speeding fine because I simply don't consent. I'm a sovereign body. I'm a sovereign citizen, and laws don't apply to me unless I personally consent to them. Which is like, that's not how laws work. But they appropriate and use a bunch of legal jargon, and they have... It creates effectively this own pseudo-law mythos, like at the Marvel alternate cinematic universe of the law, only it is garbage. And it's really confusing because they'll be using real terms incorrectly, seemingly consistent in their mind. And so they have like common law sheriffs. Like I've seen sovereign citizen protesters with their common law sheriff thing, and they talk about the common law and how important it is, and blah, 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 blah. And it's like... the common law just can get overridden any time. Like they for some reason keep using it as if the common law of England supersedes the Australian Constitution. It's like, that's the opposite. That's wrong. It's so confusing to me. But yeah. So whenever you hear someone talking about the common law, kind of double check. Just double check to make sure that they're, they know what they're talking about instead of misusing a term and are actually kind of unwell. Yeah. Anyway. Do I think Bob Katter will retire soon? He's turning 80 this year. He's the father of the house. He's been in the federal parliament for over 30 years at this point. I don't know if he'll retire. He's actually had a very prolific career. He was in state parliament, like in Queensland State Parliament in like the 1970s or something. He was like a minister under Jurubielke-Peterson. And like, it would be fascinating. I feel like he would have to live until he was like 100 and something and still be in Parliament. But like, if he had just skipped state parliament and just gone to federal parliament, he would be the only one who could really challenge Billy Hughes for longest serving member in federal parliament history, because Billy Hughes was there for like 52 or 53 years. He died in office at age 90, and he'd spent like 7 years in the New South Wales parliament prior. And I think the only person who has a comparable amount of time in parliament is Bob Katter, who may or may not actually collectively end up having the same amount of time in Parliament as Billy Hughes, but he's the only real contender. And so I don't know. I'm not in his electorate, so I'm not going to say anything whether or not he should or should not retire. I just think it's interesting that it's like, he could have beaten Billy Hughes if only he'd done a career change earlier in his career. Anyway. People don't need to study to be a politician, they just need to be elected. You can be from any walk of life, you just need to be elected. So if that's something that you want to do, go do it! Okay. If a government refused to resign after a successful vote of no confidence, would the Governor-General typically dismiss the government? Good question. That is a hypothetical one that is hard to answer. It would be hypothetically possible for the Governor-General to be like, hey man, motion of no confidence, you should resign. I could try and explain something that happened in Victoria in 1860s, but that's too complicated to do. So, motions of no confidence aren't really a common thing, or at least not successfully, in federal. And there was a motion of no confidence that was a resounding success in terms of the number of people that voted for it. And then the government was like, I don't resign. I'm going to ignore that entirely. And that government was Malcolm Fraser. When he took over Gough Whitlam, Gough Whitlam got dismissed. Malcolm Fraser went back to the House of Reps and went, hey everyone, I'm Prime Minister now. And Labour was like, what? No? And instantly passed a motion of no confidence against him. And instead of resigning and Whitlam being reinstated, the Speaker was like, let's adjourn temporarily, let's pause. I really need to go to the Governor General to deliver the news. Hey man, this motion of no confidence happened. And then John Kerr's secretary barred the door to be like, nope, don't come in. So the Governor General could issue a writ for an election and be like, no, it doesn't matter. And then, yeah, so ultimately the resolution to like, hey, there was a motion of no confidence, should you resign, got resolved at an election where the public went, actually, we don't think Malcolm Fraser should resign. We think he should be Prime Minister because they voted him in a landslide. So that got resolved just in a different way, basically. So, yeah. Anyway, I did say that I was going to go soon, and that was 10 minutes ago. So I'm actually doing really well. I normally take half an hour to go after I say I'm going to go. But, yes. I really am going to go now. I hope you've all enjoyed my little PowerPoint presentation. Whoops, that's the wrong button. I hope you all enjoy, let's find it once again, some good old images of young Albo and young Peter Dutton. Yeah, beautiful. So yes, thank you so much everyone for coming to my live stream. I hope you all enjoyed me opening some Pokemon cards at the beginning. I have another pack, so next time I'll do a couple more live streams leading up to the election. I will not answer your questions about whether or not I think a particular policy is good or bad. That is up to you to decide. And yeah, I'll open more Pokemon cards in the next one. Hopefully I get something fancy. I've got another booster pack just sitting there, just like taunting me. I'm like, I want to open it. Oh well. Anyway, it is late for you all. I hope everyone who is a homeowner enjoys the RBA rate cut that was announced today. And if you are... Look, if you're not in Western Australia, what are you doing awake? It's late now. It's not that late. So yeah, anyway, thank you. Make sure you're enrolled to vote and your details are up to date. Go to the AEC website if that's not the case. And also... yeah, go to theyvoteforyou.org.au to look up the voting record of your local member, or or the leaders of different political parties as well. He's going to eat Parliament. That's me. Anyway, yeah, almost midnight in New South Wales, but you're here learning, and that's good. Anyway, good night, everyone. Good night. Pardon me. Well, that was fun. And now's everyone's favourite part, as I switch to OBS and I have to click the end broadcast